Hello, hello. What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Couture, also known as Marsh Makes Comics, and we're here on the channel. And we're going to talk about writing comics, long versus short form storytelling, which is a fun topic. And today we have none other than Mr. Christopher Runciman here. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How about you?
I'm doing great. So I have links in the description. I got a link for Christopher's website. I got a link for Christopher's IG, and I got a link for Christopher's YouTube. All worth checking out. Absolutely. I mean, there's even more places, but we didn't want to flood you with too many links. So in the description, check those out. I'll probably throw some in the chat as we go. But is there anything you want to point people to, Chris?
No, I'm good with those, man. That's pretty cool because the website has got all of the links on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go there, you're going to find YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever.
Right.
It's all coming along.
Yeah. It looks good. I was on the website today, and I mean, you got all like a lot of your ducks in a row. A lot of people, a lot of creators, if they're trying to do something, they don't always have all those elements. Sometimes they do. So that's good.
That's because my wife and I sat down at it this week. Literally just this week, she sat down with me and we started tightening up a lot of things. And we're still in the process of doing so because I list myself as Christopher half the time, and I list myself as Runciman half the time because that's how I sign my pages. Just and it stems from my name is apparently difficult for some people to pronounce. So that's I think the only thing we're really trying to work out next is what am I going to go by at this point? So,
well, I feel like it's pretty straightforward. Like my name, Marshall Couture. I was going by Marshall Lee for a long time because I just was like, Lee is just easier to understand. There were some other personal reasons, and then like nobody knows how to pronounce couture or couture or like there's different ways to pronounce it. Sometimes people they'll throw an extra R in there when they're trying to say it, so they'll be like courtier or something, and I'm like and then if you want to say you do marshallcouture.com, it's like, well, they won't ever be able to know how to spell it. So but yeah, I don't know. I guess if you say it enough, you get people start to
yeah. Just every time you see anybody, your full name.
There you go. So yeah, man. So I guess I think a lot of people probably here do know of you, but for anybody who doesn't, let people know a little bit about yourself, what you do with the comics and all that fun stuff.
Okay. I've been in comics for over 20 years. And so I've been managing Canada's largest comic store here in London. I've been at the store for 21 years. And so in 2021, I retired from the store. And before that, I'd been really enmeshed in all the processes of the comic world from a retailer perspective and from managerial and looking at it from the outside in. But at the same time, in 2015, my wife and I started. What it was is that when we brought our houses together, my wife discovered I had 3 complete books that weren't printed in a drawer, and she said, "You really need to do something with this," because she enjoyed them, and so the Trials of Apex and Land of Hyacinth Blues, and the first Elmwood book, which there went on to be 11 of, and then those were the first 3 books that we came out with, and so we started our comic company, Runciman Press, now largely called RP Comics, just because I'm not so egocentric. I need to have my name, Runciman Press, on everybody's books. and it distances itself from just being about me if it's RP Press and we're publishing other people. So by the time COVID came around, we'd published 73 books and over 250 people. But the thing is that I've never been involved online. I've done everything regionally, locally based. And so because of that, I'm a really proficient guy. I've got I'm quite prodigious with how many things I put out, because the book that you and I met from was my 30th book. But I zero online or region or anything beyond just the local regional basis as far as anybody knowing who I was. So when I retired at the start of the pandemic in 2020 is when I finally went online. And so, good morning, Sideburns. I've always wanted to say something like that. That's funny. So that's when I started having an online presence. But it wasn't until this year that I just sat down and said, let's go. And, I started doing the one-page stuff in 2020 in order to offer it to some of our customers were really isolated, and their only outlet was to come to the store. And another thing was that the only way I could engage with some of the creatives in the local area, because because Canada was under a lockdown at the time, was by going online. And so with those two factors, I came up with, listen, if you suggest an idea for a comic, I'll draw it. And that's in 2020. So since then, after retiring in 2021 because of my health, and which I'm fine now, but I just sat down to do this full time. And it's just, it's grown and gotten busier since, but I'm still doing the one-page comics. And I mean, so since the start of this year, I've done this today. Today's comic is number 253, wow. The 253rd page. So, it's going. It's just, I have, you didn't have your copy. I got this. This is how we met.
Yeah. Yep.
And so this is a collection in comic format of one-page stories that I was doing from suggestions that people would make online. Mm-hmm. And which is the one you like, the Frankenstein ones, eh?
Yeah, those are great.
Frankenstein Goes to Kindergarten. So all of these different things in these different medium that I use, that started getting attention. That started picking up. And so this year when I finally made the move to just sit down on YouTube and go for it. I had 20 people on my YouTube. And it's growing. I mean, we're almost at 200 now. It's not growing like, crazy, but it's growing in a comfortable way because there's a lot of really cool people I get to engage with now. There's a lot of cool interaction and a lot of new and interesting processes and things I get to find out about to incorporate into how I work. And so that's where I'm at. That's my journey to here. And so now I'm writing and illustrating stories full time and trying to really push things forward and try and experiment new things.
That's so cool. It's interesting how man, there's a couple different approaches, and this isn't quite to the topic yet, but we'll get to it. But I do notice a lot of different creators, whether they're making comics or other stuff. It's funny because there's a lot of people who they get on this train of just make. They just make so much stuff. Mm-hmm. And then they don't really think about the other side of the marketing and or should I have a website or doing the social media thing? That's more of an afterthought. And I feel like that's in some ways the best place to be. Whereas I'm I've always been trying to juggle all of it. and I think that's been sometimes been a bit of a disservice to me because, you know, I don't end up getting in that, like, I lose the focus of the make part. And that's the part that's important. The work you're actually doing. That's the real important part, you know?
Well, I think depending on how you want to go about it, changes the levels of where their import is. Because if you're just interested in producing and you've got somebody around you that can facilitate that, getting it out to the world, you're aces. You can just focus purely on that.
Yeah.
But if you're not interested in anybody seeing it, you're just doing it for yourself and hanging out with friends and approaching it from that sort of, it's an interest, it's a something I feel that compelled to do, but at the same time, I don't need to do anything more with it. You're fine. But the moment as a creative, you step out into that avenue where you are producing X material and you feel that it warrants to be seen by others, you really have to figure out all that other stuff. Like you really kind of do. And the more that you want to proliferate that work out farther and farther, the more involved you're going to be in that business side, whether you like it or not. Even if you have somebody else doing it for you, you still get pulled into it. And honestly, most creators, probably, yourself, myself, I don't know, we don't think that way for that part. We largely think from that creator side.
Yeah.
So of course you feel the same complication that everybody else does.
Yeah.
It's
For sure. So, man, I just want to take a minute out to just acknowledge, like, the chat. Like, you guys are awesome. Thank you for coming by. We have Art Curious here, Lizello. We got Priya here, Jim Lujan. What's that?
I couldn't see the chat. I just turned it on.
Yeah, it didn't come up originally for me either.
Okay. Sorry. Hi, everybody.
Yeah. Jim Lujan's in the house. We got Ralph here, Sideburns. I've been putting them up as we've been talking, cool. But I just wanted to acknowledge you guys. Devante, thank you for coming by. And we're going to get into some of these questions, too. There's already at least one or two questions. We got Vol in here. What's up, dude? Thank you for coming by. And Dede is in the house. I don't know if she ever expected somebody to hear somebody say Dede is in the house, but there it goes. Here's my little hip hop reference.
It didn't say his house, so
his house. There you go. So everybody's here, and there's more to come, hopefully, because
cool.
Yeah. So
I saw Miriam is here. Art Curious.
Yes. Yep.
Miriam's tuning in from Israel.
Oh wow! Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's very cool. She's very, very fantastically creative. So
yeah, that's awesome.
That's the thing that's so cool, Marsh, is meeting so many creative people, and everybody doing their own thing. It's fun. That's a lot of fun. It's a really encouraging thing as a creator yourself to be able to engage with like minds. So
yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest reason why I've been so involved, because of the community. I mean, I feel like early on, a long time ago, we're talking like maybe, I don't know, like 13 years ago is when I really started to understand what the online community thing was. And it was mostly through podcasts. And ever since then, I've gotten to know more and more people. And it's just, it's like, you don't find that in just everyday life. You probably found it a little more if you were working at a comic book store, but still, like, that was the only place I ever found like-minded people. And, now it's like you just got to find a Facebook group and you can find like-minded people. But
yeah, it's interesting, eh?
So
it's really interesting that my background's in fine art. And so working at the bookstore was really, there's lots of like minds for the comic side, but I always liked the artsy fartsy books. Like I always liked the Bill Sienkiewicz, the Dave McKeon. I always, the John Van Fleet, the Scott Bohampton, George Pratt, Kent Williams, all those types of guys. And I had a hard time finding other people that liked those comics.
Yeah,
that was awkward. But again, like over time, you do eventually find those people. So
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I mean, even online, you're gonna get more like, you say you're scrolling on Instagram or something, and at least half of the comic book people, if you're looking up comic book people, are gonna be fan art guys.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's fine. Like I don't have any problem with people being like that, but it's not my bag, baby. Um, but same thing. Like he's talking about Dave McKean and Bill Sienkiewicz. Like I was just looking up. I didn't realize that how many like books that he has with Neil Gaiman of like mixed media comic books. It's so cool. I'm like, I gotta get my hands on these things.
Specifically, he and Gaiman have 7, right? Like
Mhm.
I've got an entire shelf that's just McKean. And like one of the things I've been doing on my stream that I do Monday to Friday is that I'm pulling books out of my library and showing them on the channel. And so I've got a ton of McKean books. They're really weird McKean books that people didn't know existed. So it's kind of fun.
I'm looking to start building my collection. I don't actually have much, but I want to. I only discovered it because I was at a comic shop the other, probably a couple months ago. And, I just pulled something off the shelf that said Gaiman and McKean. And I'm like, huh, I thought he just did like the Sandman covers and stuff. And lo and behold, it's like full graphic novels or something like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a whole treasure trove of stuff I don't even know about.
One of my top 5 books is Violent Cases by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite books. I own 6 different copies of that book.
Okay. All
Like
right.
6, like it's pretty dorky. So when I met Dave McKean in Toronto
Uh-huh.
at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, I've got a photo of him that I used to have up on my page. It was just a bunch of guys are talking in line that were from London as well, and they're like, and one of them shouts down the line at me, Runciman, how many copies of Violent Cases do you own? And I said, I'm at 5 right at the time, and 5 versions, man, you're a weirdo. And it was like, there's 5 versions, and it turned into this whole thing in the whole line. And so I got a chance to meet Dave McKean, and I got a photo with him. And the same thing usually happens when I have photos with people, and it's usually, disproportionate because I'm gorilla sized. But it was really cool to meet the guy. I have such massive respect for him, and he's this very polite and 5'8" British guy. That was very nice to meet you. Yeah. And I was like, you expect him to be this rock star guy, and no, he's very, very much a average guy.
Yeah,
Really cool dude.
for sure. Okay. Do you guys hear me? Because I just hit my wire, and I'm like,
You're good.
okay, good. Because this wire is like so weird. So, anyways, we do have a question from Mr. Jim Lujan. We're gonna get into the topic too, but I want to get to some of these. Of course, Jim always has questions, so I like that. Do you see a difference between Canadian and American audiences regarding your work? That's actually really interesting.
Well, my work is only really kind of coming out now to American people and abroad. And aside from being told I spell color wrong, because I use King's English, and everybody's like, it's just COLOR. Aside from that, I don't think that there is
too, right?
right. But aside from that, I don't see that there really is any difference. I think that I'm getting to know a lot of really cool people, and I know that I've come kind of screaming out of a closet type thing, because a lot of times when you enter into online communities, you're still not fully formed yet, and you're the freshness, newness, and you want to learn type thing. Whereas I'm older guy who's been going for a while and has some tricks in my tool bag, and where'd that guy come from? sort of a thing. So it's a nice opportunity to meet all kinds of people internationally, outside of, and in nationally and inside Canada as well. Lots of cool people I met here that are, in other parts of the country. But I don't notice that there's been any difference to response to the work. I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about it. I got a lot of really cool things said from a lot of really cool people, and I like that. I'm very appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm.
Very humbling.
Yeah, yeah, it usually is when you get any kind of like praise and stuff. Let's see. Oh, Priya Mason says, I'm trying my comic strip too, but it's not easy doing it by yourself. And when you're struggling with your mental health, yeah, it can be tough. I think Chris, you probably have some tricks up your sleeves when it comes to making a comic strip.
I think the easiest way to tackle any project, and it's the same sort of thing that you've heard 1,000 people say in 1,000 different ways, and yet there is a truth to it. You can work on a grand idea with a whole gigantic, epic objective. You want this, I want to write Lord of the Rings. How about you just start with a Hobbit? How about you just start with the first chapter? How about you just start with the first scene? How about you just introduce the Hobbit? And as soon as you start to compartmentalize down, like I hope this helps Priya, but as soon as you look at it as simply as you can, then you're on your way. And just look at it as in 4 notes. You want 4 simple things. You want the context. You want to introduce the character or the situation or the place they live, whatever it is. Then you want to introduce what the problem is. So I usually example it like this. Bob wants some milk, but he's got no milk in his fridge. So Bob is the character. The conflict, no milk, right?
Yep.
So the body of the piece, in order to resolve the conflict, Bob starts going to the store. And then we get to the third part, 1, 2, 3, climax is where Bob gets to the store, gets his milk, forgot his wallet. So the conclusion of it is Bob's walking back home to get his wallet to do the whole thing over again. But that's as basic as you can get. A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. Person, problem, the big moment of trying to address the problem, and the outcome. And as much as you can reduce any story down, it allows you to focus on 4 things. And so even if you're having challenges with mental health, or you're having problems with focus, or you're having problems with confidence, just break it down into 4 pieces, and just allow yourself the time to pursue those, to express those. And okay, here's Bob. The next thing I'm going to do is figure out what's the problem, Bob. And as soon as you start from that foundation, you should be able to pursue your stories despite whatever things you might think are holding you back.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. And I think I love what you say too about like, kind of starting small and stuff. And I know that's not the way everybody approaches it, but I do think it generally is pretty good advice for most people. And it definitely helped me. And like you said, even Tolkien, who's known, the dude, like he created a language for his characters. Like, like he went like as in-depth story world building as you could probably go. Yet he started really, and if you think about it, he started with The Hobbit, but like he was making The Hobbit and other little stories just for his kids, from what I understand, just to tell them, fun stories before bed or whatever. and that's how it started. It didn't start off as this big complex thing, and then eventually he gets to the Similarian or whatever. Or Cimmerillion, I don't know how to say it, but
Silmarillion.
yes, that thing. So
Yeah, those simple stories to tell as kids. When you go and sit down and write those out, and just try to remember what you said to them, a lot of writers will say, write sloppy. Just get it down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Don't worry about it being the most fluid language you've ever seen, and it's the prettiest thing ever known. Just get it down. Sloppy, crunchy, let it go. And when you do that, you've got something. And as soon as you've got the clay, you can make this. You can make the sculpture, right? It's just, you got to start someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's generally what I, when I teach classes, and when I go into different institutions and have talks and stuff like that, one of the things I always say is just start with an idea. Just get that down. What's the idea? And that's a great place to start. The rest of it comes along. It's the same as when you're doing the art, just start drawing.
Yeah.
That's the silliest secrets I can say about the art part of it. Just start drawing. Pick up the pencil. The worst thing in the world you can do to yourself as a creative is to not pick up the pencil. And as soon as you do that, well, your body is going to feel compelled to start scribbling it down on something.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because like I've said a million times, I got into this like synthesizer and the music stuff within the last few years, a different version of me making music, and it was all based on just being experimental, like literally just sitting with the tools in front of me and making weird sounds. And I would get stuck in that really a lot, but that taught me to approach my writing, my comics differently as well. And it's funny because then I see you coming along with your videos and everything and doing your one-page comics, and I'm like, this is exactly what I've been trying to talk about but haven't done yet. Like but like I love, so one thing I'm learning about like mixed media and like collage and stuff more. And one thing that I think is interesting, I heard some people use this phrase, like when they start a page, they sometimes they'll just put anything on there. They'll just start rolling a color on there or whatever it is. They'll start painting a color on there, and they'll even say like they say it this way. They're like, first you just got to activate the page, and I'm like, that is such a weird phrase, but I love it. It's like you just got to get something down. It's like you press go on the page, and everything after that, it kind of starts to fall into place, kind of like what you're saying.
I've got all kinds of approaches to that. Like, so one of the things that I'm known for my paintings and large drawings is that I will take tape and paper and cardboard or whatever, and I'll adhere it to the surface that I'm working on. And so I'll be priming prime a piece of paper and stick some ripped up paper on it and prime over it. Now it's enmeshed. It's part of the whole thing. Another thing I'm notorious for when I'm talking to students is, I don't want to wreck. Whenever I hear, I don't want to wreck the paper. I don't want to make a mistake. And the first thing I'll do is just grab a pencil and whatever sheet of paper I've got, and I just scribble on it. Okay, good. We've already made a mark. Let's go. Just let that, like that's the greatest advice I think that most people can have for others is just let that go. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting thing about paper is that you don't tend to buy one sheet at a time. Is one of the things I've always said to some of the kids is that you don't buy one sheet at a time. And the other part of that, even if you only do have one sheet, you can flip it over. So worry about that less and think more along the lines of, I've got stuff inside I got to get out. It's just a form of communication. you don't start speaking French immediately. It takes time to learn the language. It takes time to learn to express ourselves in any way that we can, but it's never going to happen if you don't start, So, it's a challenge, but yeah, activating the page I've heard, and just initialize an idea. That's another one I heard. That was fun. Yeah, get started. Just get started is the thing that I used to hear when I was a kid.
Yeah. So when it comes to like writing, so part of why I went the writing route with this topic today is, it's not actually the first thing I would have thought of if I'm like, okay, I'm going to have Christopher on, not because you don't write or anything, just because there's other things I want to ask you, which we'll probably get to. But I had somebody ask me, I put up a little short of me doing some art or whatever the other day, and somebody said, "Oh, that's really cool. I'd love to hear more stuff about your writing process." And I'm like, well, I've talked a lot about my writing process, but it's, I'll say some more stuff and maybe I can have a video talking about it. But I was thinking, like, I as I was responding to him, I'm thinking like, it started off very primitive, and I'm still kind of at that like level of like I don't feel like I have a process exactly, and I don't think I'll ever have a set process because I started out very primitive, like literally like, let me just brainstorm and write a list of like, these things happen. Okay, now I'm going to go start drawing the comic, and it wasn't like a really structured thing. And I still, in a lot of ways, am similar to that, but now I've started to learn, more things about story structure, how characters work, how stories, how character arcs work, how plot works, and things like that. But it's still, still kind of starts from that primitive place. I'm curious, have you done much with studying like story and how to write story, or have you kind of just gone the intuitive route, and your process is kind of just from practice, or how'd that go?
So I know for a fact that while it, okay, so I'm at a point now that I know for a fact that I've read a lot of things, and I've watched a lot of things and studied a lot of things, and made a lot of notes, and over quite a few years. And at the same time, I've tried to implement those things in whatever different ways on a number of different projects. So when I do the one-page comics now, it comes off as pretty intuitive, but it comes off as pretty intuitive with a lot of foundation and structure that's really put in there. You know what I mean? Like it becomes easy to externalize that from imagine it's like it's an invisible machine that's putting it together and just spitting it out, but it just looks like it's being spit out, but there's a big machine in there. And so because of that, a lot of those structures and a lot of those considerations are going on in the back of the noggin. And, no matter what, if you're going to pursue an avenue, if you're going to pursue any sort of endeavor, you can't help but want to learn more about it. And you can't feel a sense of growth without implementing those things, without putting those things into play. Like, there's some really interesting people that you can resource. Like, there's a fantastic talk that, this is Corbin, by the way. There's a fantastic talk that Kurt Vonnegut does about the arc of story. And he has a chalkboard. And he has the beginning point in the chalkboard. He has the raising of stakes over a period of time. And so he talks about the arc of a character's growth in the story. And he talks about, the points in a story and the peaks and the valleys of how those go along. And that's sort of just a minor little insight and a minor little visualization really gives people a sense of the ebbs and flow of telling a story in a larger way. But that's complicated, right? That's, you can listen to David Mamet talk, who wrote films like The Heist, right, with Gene Hackman. And Mamet is possibly one of the greatest writers I can think of for film. Most people know who David Mamet is. I would hope so, but maybe not. But he's an absolute genius writer. But the challenge is he has an awful lot of complex knowledge behind him, right? And he makes it look like, just do the thing, and he comes off as aggressive. I think if you're going to write, I think if you're going to figure out the processes for things, then you just got to get started. Like, it's the same thing as with art. Somebody asked a question, I saw it a second ago, but what do you do if you only have one idea? Then write about your shoes. And that's a Vonnegut thing, right? There's because he says, just write about whatever you see, whatever's around you right now. He wrote, let me write a little short story about my cigarettes. Like, it's just, there's no such thing as one idea. You'd be amazed if you step back from that headspace for a second and just step yourself back from it and think about that. The fact that you want to write about this one idea is your second idea. It's a different way of coming into a story. Or what if somebody was watching you sit there contemplating your idea from outside the window? Well, there's another idea for you to implement. And so any of these outlying structures, any of these different takes, different angles that you can look at any story, you've got to be open. You've got to be receptive to those. Don't be precious about, well, I want to do something different. Just write. And over the course of time, you're going to recognize that the Bob goes to get some milk story, if you've written 4 or 5 versions of those, you're not going to want to write about, well, Bob going to get milk. Well, I switched to the pop. Okay, pop. But then I switched to the coffee. Okay, coffee. But eventually you're going to come up with a different story. So sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes routine and repetition and practice. And, over time you're going to develop more sophistication. I know, I'm sorry, Marsh, I talk a lot. I apologize.
No, I love it.
Northrop Frye, and then he goes back off on the tangent again. Northrop Frye was a professor of theology at University of Toronto, but he wrote a thesis, a short book of some of his thesis, and then one was The Educated Imagination. And the theory is this: the more that you imbibe in something, the more that you do something, okay, you're going to develop a more sophisticated outlook on that. If you read books, you're going to read more and more involved books. You can't just read the same book over and over and over again. If you like food, you're going to eat different kinds of food over time, because you cannot eat mashed potatoes and roast beef every day, right? Okay, somebody wants to, but and it's the same thing with music. It's the same thing with art. It's the same thing with even when you go for a walk, you're going to change the way, the path. You're going to change the streets you go for your nightly walk on. And writing and drawing is the same thing. When you write, you naturally want to explore different things.
Yeah.
Just be open to it. I think that's, yeah. What does that say? Don't be precious.
Don't be.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Imperium. Yeah. That's a fantastic point. I mean, just do it. Do more of it, and enjoy it. And if you're not enjoying it, do something different. If this project is making you anxious and frustrated, and you're feeling, it's becoming a labor, right? You can pick that project up, you can set it right there, and start a different project, right? Unless somebody's got you under contract to finish that first one, do a different one.
Yeah.
Allow yourself that growth and an opportunity.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff in there that I think is really interesting, and I'm going to tackle one at the moment. We got the cat
Sort of.
tube going on. No, it's good. We like
Corbin
cats.
sits on my one leg and leans on my desk, and so I am often impressed with having to try to work over a cat. He actually thinks it's stupid, so,
yeah. So, as far as writing these stories, like obviously you're very at this point well known for doing these very short form stories, and I'm curious because obviously they're like more of an experimental nature. They probably do, if you really analyze them, have that kind of 3 act structure, or you were saying like 4 parts. Because even in comic books, like or any story, like each scene kind of has that structure. Each panel can even have that structure. But that being said, I'm curious, like kind of approaching story and approaching comics in that 1 page format, like what are some of the things that maybe you've like learned from that? Is there things from that that you feel like help you to inform and be able to even write longer stories better from doing that practice?
okay, this might sound a little bit egocentric, but um, so I got a quote that's going to be on the back of the book, and it's somebody reviewed the stuff that's going in my book that's going to be coming out soon, and they said that I have heterodox visual storytelling, and what that means is I break the rules. Basically, I'm trying to make new rules. And there's orthodoxy means you follow the set pattern. Unorthodox means you go against the set pattern. Heterodox means you're breaking it and making a new one, and trying whatever. I tend to call it throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And so I don't follow rigid structures like a 3 act play. Like, and a lot of people don't. You realize that. Okay, Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick, is 2 acts. It's a 2 act film. You have them at training camp for Vietnam, and then they're in the war. There's no intermediate period. It's bing bong, and that's it. It's the preparation for this ideal, and then there's the realization of the ideal. And so when it comes to approaching structure, there's a couple of simple basics, especially when it comes to graphic storytelling. You need to have the information in an image that is required. You don't need, because especially in cases like sequential art, and I say sequential art over comics because sequential art also includes animation and video game development, things like that, because it's a bunch of sequence of images and ideas, right? But that fusion of text and art, if you've got Bob looking in the fridge from a side angle, and in a word balloon right here, Bob says, "We're all out of milk." You don't have to draw the inside of the fridge to show that there's no milk in there, because that fusion of visual and textual elements have given you all of that information that you need for the whole picture. And so when you start to think about that, and you start to think about exploring an idea, there's the simplest things to look at is that you need to present the scenarios, the situation, the character, whatever, and the outcome. And if you start from that basis, not even the 4-part story, but just the 2 end pieces of it, then everything in between is like jazz. Does that make sense?
Improvisation.
It's jazz. It's just seeing what works. We know that in the Western world, we read from the top left. In the Asian world, the predominancy of their sequential material starts in the top left and goes to the bottom right. But focusing on this marketplace, we go this way. We know that we need a downward angle on our material. So if the image and the words are going across like this, that gets us to that bottom point, we're good, right? There's all those little parts of it. And the rest of it's nuance. The rest of it's you figuring it out as you go. And the best part that you can do is make a lot of mistakes. Every mistake you possibly can. Ruin your pages, but don't throw them out. Ruin your page. If you spill the ink, set it aside and let the ink dry, but then get back to it. Pick up some white ink, pick up some white paint, pick up some white pen, and go at it again. It's jazz. All writing and art is jazz. I hope that answers that. I think I might have gone off again, but
yeah, no, it makes sense. And it's kind of funny because I do think you can boil story down to basically 2 acts. And I feel like maybe even almost 1, but I feel like 2 is still going to be in there. But to me, it's almost just like you say jazz. I also think of like blues or other music uses the call and response, and I feel like
it still has that underlying. It has a more rigid structure than jazz, right? Because blues has a form.
Mm-hmm.
It does have an underlying form to it. The reason I tend to go for jazz over other types of music is that because there are aspects of jazz where parts of it just break, and parts of it will do things like in blues you tend to have everything at least syncopated in the same time, where in jazz you can have people playing at fourths and fifths at the same time.
Right.
And for music people that know what to look for, they'll understand that. But it's just this person's clapping over here, right? And there's the 4th scale, but then and that person that's hitting that 2nd click is a 5th. And whoa, how do you do that? How does a person play in 5ths? And when it's just jazz, it's just improvisation. It's just somebody who's figured out all the rules enough about playing in 4ths that they can jump a note,
mm-hmm.
jump a note. And jump a note, and it upsets everybody else that knows to listen for it but has no idea how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no magic to it. It's just repetition, right?
Well, yeah, and another thing with jazz too, getting kind of on that musical thing is the notation and stuff. So like we have these scales that most of us have decided on. Most of the musicians have decided on. This is the scales that work in music, generally. And then you want to stay, within those scales, those chords and stuff, those notes. But with jazz, every note can, depending on how, not every jazz song is like this, but every note is valid. and you could even get into some realms of music where there's also microtones, because if you listen to, the birds outside, they're not playing any specific notes necessarily. They might glide from one note to the other. There's a ton of like microtones in between, but that doesn't mean it's still not pretty. That still doesn't sound beautiful, just because they're not going by the certain, scale, so you can, yeah. I think jazz actually does make a lot of sense.
And so when it comes to writing story, if you have a routine set, okay, so cartoonists that are doing single panel pieces, that's like The Far Side or Herman, or cartoons of those like, you have to have the presentation of elements, the character, the setting, the situation, and the outcome in a single image. And that's more complicated than doing it in segments, doing it in parts. And what I'm always impressed by, here's somebody I'll example right now. Terry Brett. Dede Willingham on her stream, she has a bag that she has taken the time to sit down and write crocodile, puts it in the bag, you know, in a balloon, puts it in a bag. And so she has all these prompts that she offers. If you want prompts, I'll pull prompts out of the bag, and there you go. And Terry Brett engages in that more than anybody else, I think. And she's really proficient at it because she has the ability to surmise all of that information into a single image and have an outcome of it, like an outcome from that in that image. And I don't know that a lot of people realize how complex that is. You know, like one of the things I like to do when I'm approaching anything is I like to embed a second idea in it, and I don't often tell people what those might be, or like I have the very obvious part of things, but I'm and this gets more complicated and complex, so I'm going to try to pull it back. But I like to embed secondary ideas or secondary considerations in the stuff. It looks like I'm talking about A, but I'm really talking about B. And I talked about this earlier today on my stream, where you can produce a piece and subjectively not realize that you were actually considering something else when you were working on a piece. And in reflection, when you look at it again at a different time, you recognize, oh, I was really dealing with something else there. There's that as well. So it's sometimes there's a third context to a piece that somebody might do. None of that changes the fact that whatever your story is and whatever you're trying to put down and whatever you're trying to express and communicate externally to the world, whether it's just writing, whether it's just drawing, whether it's a fusion of the two together, or any other creative output, like it's collage, it's film, it's Jim Lujan, a brilliant animator, whatever it is, it has absolutely no control whatsoever to the person that watches it, reads it, looks at it, and what's going on in their head when they do. Like, no matter what we produce and what tales we try to tell, or what little pieces of something that we try to expose, if it's a smaller piece, it subjectively changes from how I look at it to how, Marsh, you look at it, right? People asked Alan Moore when they adapted From Hell, Johnny Depp. And they said, Alan, what do you think about this film? And he said, I don't care. I have no interest in seeing this film. Because in Alan's head, Alan wrote the story. And he gave that story to Eddie Campbell. And Eddie Campbell illustrated it. The movie that was playing in Alan Moore's head was already translated into a slightly different movie from how Eddie Campbell drew it. So what does he care if there's a third or a fourth iteration of that? As the writer, he wrote a story. How the artist interpreted, that's one thing. But then the audience has already added in a third aspect by how they related to what has been written and illustrated by those two guys. So for you to go on and make a movie of that, there's a fourth. That you're now viewing the movie of a book. There's a fifth. All these separate removals from Alan Moore. He doesn't care. And it's a really healthy thing to assess that. It's a really healthy thing to appreciate that. You want to tell stories, you want to make art, do it. Just do it. Don't worry about satisfying the other person. Because my absolute favorite fan could very well be living someplace remote in a climate that is unhospitable to me, with no power, no hydro, no whatever, but a piece of paper flits on the wind into their hut, and she looks at it and goes, "This is the greatest piece of literature that has ever been made." If I'm waiting to get that piece to her, right? What's the point of doing anything? I don't know how to get that to her. So I'm just going to produce stuff, and somebody's going to connect to it, and I have no control over whether or not that gets on the wind. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Actually, it makes me think of I actually asked a question when I was on your stream today, and I told you before the show I had a phone call. So I had missed, if you answered it, I missed the answer to the question.
I did. It involved a musical number and explosions.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
an elaborate
I have to watch
response.
it. But I am curious, like maybe my audience here would be interested in hearing your response to that. Do you have after you've made and the discussion could continue because I have some thoughts, but after you've made like one of these one-page comics and you go back, if you do go back and look at it, do you ever feel like you see new meaning in it that you didn't 100% intend, but I don't know, do you ever see new stuff in there?
That's the time travel question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean by that? If you could go back in time, Marsh, and talk to yourself when you were 16, right? Would you do that?
Would I do it?
Yeah, would you, just
I'd be afraid to, because I'd be afraid to mess up something.
But when you go back in time and you talk to yourself when you're 16, and you try to explain to yourself the differences of how the world, your perspective on everything, and how the world exists and the rules are and all those things to your 16-year-old self, think about who you were when you were 16 and how you would have responded to this weird old dude.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the time travel paradox. You can go back in time as much as you want, but it's not going to change what was happening at the time. So the flip side of that is that when you look at something that you did yesterday, right? There was things going on in your head, and there was perspectives that you had when you did this piece based on yesterday. But since yesterday, you've flown in an airplane and you've run across the ocean with a really wide pair of shoes. And, you're a different person than you were yesterday. So no matter what happens, when you look at anything that you've just done from your related experience as just one step removed, you're going to see it differently, right? And then there's the complex problem of creatives, is that as you grow and as you develop and as you expand creatively, the more you look back at your early work and try to reassess that based on today's standards and structures that you have in your world, it's never going to be quite the same. So if you're looking at old work, just look at it and go, oh, okay, I like that. That's fun. and allow yourself to see the things in there. Oh, okay, I see what I was doing at the time. Or, that's a fun thing. Maybe I'll reassess that and approach it in a different way and something else. But never go back and rework old ideas. Like never go back and I'm going to redo that. That's terrible now. Never do that. When you look at anything that you did, you're always going to see differences in the pieces that you did, and you're going to relate to those pieces because you're a different person now. And so you're going to see the piece, but you're also going to contextualize the piece to what you were going through in your day-to-day life at the same time. Or you're going to go through the piece and remember, oh, that's the day I had to take my cat to the cat hospital because he was getting sick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So no matter what, whenever we look at stuff that we've already done, it's never going to be just where we were in the moment. And you're always going to see deeper resonances to it. You're always going to see deeper meanings. And if you're going through something and subconsciously you leak some of those elements, you're going to look at that later and go, what was I doing? Or, boy, that's disclosing a lot. There'll be a million different things that come out of it. So, that is always. So, and the easiest answer to it is that is always going to be the case. Always. Mm-hmm. Unless, you're a robot that doesn't change. Right? This piece is blue line. Look at it tomorrow, blue line. Right? But that's not what you're doing. You're a complex guy. You're a complex individual. So
Right.
that's very important. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it is. It's just interesting to me because, I've learned to approach music in a certain way, and then, now I'm trying to apply some of that to comics. It's a little bit harder because there does have to, like with a story, there has to be some kind of logic of some sort. um and but there is, obviously there's also such thing as experimental story and stuff like that. But
Yes.
I did an album last year, and it was more on an experimental side of things. And it's funny because I didn't get much response from it, but there was one person who responded and told me their thoughts about it.
Cool.
And this person also knows me. Like I've talked, I'm friends with them, where we're close enough where he kind of knew the struggles and stuff and different things that I might have been going through at that time while I was making it. And it was just really interesting to hear what they said, because they found like kind of a deeper meaning than I meant for it, in the music. And but then when they said that, I was like, you're kind of right. That kind of is in there, but I didn't really intend it. Like, so I
That's
don't know. It's just interesting. Sometimes these subconscious things can come through.
yeah. That's the exact perfect example of it, right? Like subjectively, you're unconsciously producing elements in anything that you do that you might not realize. Illustrators, on a really weird subconscious level, whenever they're doing portrait work or any characters that they're drawing, they'll put a little bit of themselves into those characters. They'll People don't realize it. Doesn't matter how good you are, how formulaically trained that if it's a subtle thing, like somebody always has characters always going like this, which is how they stand, and they don't consciously realize they're doing that with the things they're drawing. So you'll always see stuff like that. It's kind of intriguing. Did Paul Pate just say I'm sounding like Rick Rubin?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that good?
I would say that's a compliment. People love Rick Rubin right now.
Do I got to grow a beard?
He put out that book. It's pretty good from what I heard. I've only heard pieces of it. I haven't read it yet, but
I haven't read it. I tend not to read those kinds of books, and I think those books are incredibly helpful, and I think those books are incredibly encouraging for people. And I have I've always found more benefit from books that rather than I don't know. I'm at a point now where I'm not looking for the enlightenment part. I'm looking for the subversive structure, which is why I tend to like guys like Vonnegut or Mamet. You know, they're swinging for the nuance, and I'm pretty wide open at this point in life. And 10 years ago, that Rick Rubin book would have been brilliant for me. But at this point now, I'm pretty euphoric, and just really open and receptive to stuff. But it probably, you know, it probably comes from being old. I don't know.
So I'm curious. I love that the word subversive. I've been interested in that word for a long time, actually. But what in that, like when you say you're more interested in the subversive structure, I'm curious what that means for you.
Well, when you V for Vendetta, okay, written by Alan Moore, right? V for Vendetta is about this totalitarist government over England that is, the governing parts of it are pieces of the body, and the head is at the top, and it's a totalitarist state. They've removed all immigrants from the country, just the British, which tell me who those people are. But and they've closed their borders off. They've got this police state that they live within, There's secret police. There's this loss of individuality and identity, and this character comes out of nowhere, Citizen V, and he goes against the conformity of the state. He is trying to subversively undermine the situation as it is by not from combating it directly. It's one guy, but not from fighting a war. What he's trying to do is fight a war with the people, okay? And to get them to realize that this is the way it is because everyone accepts it. And it came about to be this way because you let that happen too. Wake up. That's the whole war he's fighting. But when he wrote that, and the references that those have in there was during a period of in government in England when the longest running prime minister was in office, and that's Margaret Thatcher, the Labour Party, who was implementing and enlarging a welfare state and reducing a lot of people down and saying that, people are saying there's not enough money for food here. Like, we can't survive. And she's saying, you can survive on cans of tuna. And which is really dismissive. But the point is that what if you take that idea and exaggerate it to the extreme? V for Vendetta. And so he's speaking to today in the 1980s. He's speaking to that time and place in a piece of fiction. He's subversively attacking the system he sees around him through a book, right? So subversion in literature and subversion in ideas is when somebody talks about one thing and while illustrating another. So Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right?
Yep.
Everything's absurd. Everybody just lighten up and relax and enjoy the moment and realize that all the things that you think are important are kind of dumb. Everything's dumb. We're just people. We're just silly, ridiculous monkeys, And he starts from as in a state of degrees. The main character, his house. He wakes up. He's brushing his teeth. All is shaking. This cheaply made cup he has sitting on the side of his sink falls off onto the carpet on the floor and shatters because it's so cheap. So immediately he starts with things that generally easily break. That's the first note. Right? Goes outside. There's a whole bunch of construction equipment. They're going to knock his house down to make a new road to go into town. I don't know about, what are you talking about? You can't do that. There's been a notice up at City Hall for months. No, well, nobody told me, So then his friend shows up while he's lying in front of a demolition machine and says, you got to come with me. Convinces the construction workers with beer and peanuts not to knock his house down until they've done all the beer so that they can go and grab a drink at the bar. And then they'll be right back and we can continue where we were, which is already absurd, right? They go to the bar. He tells us, I'm from outer space. We got to get out of here. Earth is about to be blown up to make way for an interstellar highway. Right? So the subversiveness of that, don't take everything so seriously because it's all messed up. Like every time you try to think of, well, we have postings down at City Hall, but we didn't tell you about it. Oh, you can't. And when they say people of Earth, there's no use complaining. There's been something up on the noticing boards of Beetlejuice 5 for at least 300 years. Well, when have we flown Beetlejuice 5? So subversive writers and subversive ideas like that are really compelling to me. The idea of talking about one thing while cladding it in something else. And I think a lot of good literature does that. Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, but she's actually talking about what's going on in science and in the politic of her day around her. She talks about the guy that founded the German Illuminati group, not the big Illuminati thing that people think is today, but the German group about taking over the German government that called themselves the Illuminati. Well, that character is directly relatable to Victor Frankenstein. And the monster would be the Illuminati, which leads to all of the actions that happen in the course of Frankenstein are directly relatable to the big major actions that happened over the course of the French Revolution. The French Revolution was inspired by the ideas of the guy that started the German group, the Illuminati, right? So the creation by this guy gets out of control and goes rampantly killing innocents. Well, the creation of the French Revolution, all these people are getting guillotined that did nothing wrong. They didn't do anything. And they're just caught up in the fervor of it all. So, but you don't realize that unless you spend the time examining and looking into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So any good piece of writing should have something deeper to it. But that's like, when you're doing a short story, just write a short story. Just write about Bob getting some milk, right? Well, okay, in a few years from now, you write a short story about Bob getting some milk and about how Bob is really disappointed in how things are going in his life. And the milk is just another example of things are never there when you need them. Okay? So now you're at this level. And a couple of years from there, you write a story about the inadequacies of society and how there's never enough supply for the demand that people have for just the simple subsidence in their world. Bob just needs some milk. But the deeper you get along these little plateaus about the story and the more sophistication that you have to embed those things, the more subversive you get about doing it. Makes for a more compelling read for a broader audience. But the secret, and Orwell said this, George Orwell, who wrote 1984 on Animal Farm, in his book, The Politics of the English Language. Keep it simple, stupid comes from that book. Now, he doesn't say keep it simple, stupid, but he says, if a simple word will suffice, use that instead of a complicated one. And if you can example an idea in a simple way for more people to be able to get into it, and you figure out the nuances of the complicated ideas within it, then you can write about a bunch of animals on a farm rebelling against the farmer when you're actually writing this treatise of the fallibilities of communism. Animal Farm, right? So that's what I mean by the subversion. That's what I mean about its complexity. And nowadays there's the subvert the text idea that they're fantastically using incorrectly right now in Hollywood. With like they really destroyed the Star Wars franchise, trying to subvert expectation. Do you know what I mean by that? So subverting expectation is not the same thing as subverting expectation. Like when you've got a character that's going through this situation where they don't know who they are, and somebody says, "You're just this. I found out. That's all you are," and it radically changes their perspective on themselves. Okay, so somebody who's supposed to be this promised one is just another person. And the only person that should really change the expectations for is the character, right? We as the viewer didn't have any expectation for them to be the promised one because the story hadn't told us that. Maybe some people had hoped for it, but the story didn't tell us that. So that's not subverting expectation. It's just the next part of the story. Now, then they get it more complicated by then switching back and forth on that. No, she's the Emperor's granddaughter. Surprise. Spoiler alert, I saved you from a horrible film. So it's that's not subverting expectation again and reversing it back. It's not. It's because if we knew the end of the story first, then it would be. If we knew that against type she would play. Like if she has everything for her, subverting expectations, the end of Game of Thrones. because the writing in that last season is so bad that the girl just decides to become a sycophant at the end of the film. And to everything that she has set up and everything she has characterized herself not to be, they just wrote her to be deciding to do it overnight. Now there's a subversion, right? And the reason that that's a subversion is that the writers themselves didn't let the actors know what was going on. I mean, that doesn't just subvert expectation, that subverts logic.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, when you are truly, using subversion in writing, as you were describing earlier, how important do you feel like it is for the audience to kind of be in on it and understand what's going on, below the actual surface of the story?
If I make a reference that somebody gets, 5 people in a room, 1 person gets it, fun. That's fun. If 4 people don't catch that reference, but they look at it and go, that's fun. Right? But they don't need to know the reference. That's fine. I mean, we can't control how people get it. And if the occasional situation happens where you say something or do something and somebody connects to that, right? Then that person is a little more in tune with your style of writing, or with your, however well you can nuance a thing in. And there's no right or wrong on that, right? You're just producing a form of communication for others, and you're doing it with whatever facility that you have. And to worry about if it's going to be good for somebody else, or if there's what's the rewards that you're going to reap. Will I win an Oscar for this? Will I win a Hugo Award? Will this get me a Pulitzer Prize? Whatever award systems people are looking for, they're artificial. They don't matter. They don't matter. I mean, sure, if there's money involved and stuff, it's good. But what you've made a thing. If somebody reads a thing and goes, "Hey, I read your thing," all right. That's what you got. I mean, and if somebody picks up a thing and goes, "I want to support your thing," what'd you think of it? I plan on reading it in 2 years. Okay. I appreciate you buying the thing. You can't put any value to that. You can't put anything into whatever you're producing. If you're making art because you have to have capitulation, if you're making anything because you have to have somebody that gets every joke you make, you have to have somebody that loves every expression you're able to put on a character's face, then you're going to be unhappy. And you're going to be despondent, and you're not going to continue doing this thing. You're not going to continue writing and drawing, because it's contingent on acceptance, and acceptance isn't guaranteed, right? So just do your thing. And from the simplest starting place, find your voice and sing. You're going to sing badly. We're going to love it. Because sometimes singing badly, you never know, right? It's gonna catch on, and everybody's gonna sound like Taylor Swift. Wait, yeah. So just do your thing, right? And I think you have something important to say. That's why I have no value judgment on what Bob from Billy from Betty does. I have no value judgment on that. I am not going to look at what Bob and Bill and Betty does and say, "Bill, look at Bob and Betty. Come on, man. That's not fair to Bill." Yeah, that's not fair to Bill. It's just, it's important to look at everything from its own standpoint. It's important to look at every work from its creator as being valid in the first place because they made it. It's important to recognize that so-and-so might have been working for 10 years, but is still at this plateau. They're still producing work that looks no different than what they did 10 years ago. And that's fine, right? This person might have 10 years ago, turned their back to the paper and thrown the pencil out and called it a picture. And now they're drawing like Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, that's fine too. There's no, you can't judge everything the same. That's why I don't believe in critics, because nobody is omniscient. Nobody looks at everything as just the merit of it in a thing in and of itself. Everybody looks at it in comparison to others, and that's not fair. Now, it's not to say that there's things that I don't like more than others. There are, but those things are more in tune with me, or I respect the level of effort and development that went into getting to that point to create that work. I don't know. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is I'm kind of thinking of it too as like almost from an audience point of view, because you just described what the kind of other story to Frankenstein's monster is, Mary Shelley. And I recently listened to the audiobook, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. Had no clue it was about what you just said it was about. And now I feel like if I listen to the book again or read the book again with that in mind, I'll enjoy it even more,
Like, it doesn't make any sense in the book why suddenly the Frankenstein monster goes to Ireland. And
yeah, there was some things that I was like, why is this happening? But now, knowing that, now it's like, oh, okay.
Well, why does the book go to Ireland? Well, it's in order to draw into the revolutionary fervor, the Irish Revolution. And why does it end in St. Petersburg? Because it ends in the revolutionary fervor and the major loss of Napoleon at St. Petersburg. And he lost the majority of his army and had to turn around and come back. That was the death of the ideal, right? Which is where the culmination event is for Victor and the monster. And the monster goes off into the mist, right? Its ardor has passed. So none of it matters. It's a really great book of a crazy guy making a zombie man. and I love Frankenstein for that. So what do you read into Jekyll and Hyde? A scientist who makes a serum that, takes all of his inhibitions away and makes a crazy little angry monkey version of himself that goes out and commits terrible, terrible atrocities until he's put down? Or is it a subjective analysis of the duality of man and that we are our own worst enemy? It's a monkey man. Right? Because more people are going to see it as that. That's what it is. Oh, there's more to it if you look at it. But not everybody gets to looking at that because not everybody has read enough stuff to start to look at things on those levels. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes academia destroys things. Sometimes the over-analysis of things and these universities are pumping out these people that over-analyze every, subjective aspect of beautiful things that are produced and deconstructed. Well, that doesn't. It might improve it for some people that are subjectively on that level of analysis, but it doesn't improve it for everybody. Because somebody else is going to look at Frankenstein. I read Frankenstein. Some guy says it was French Revolution. That's stupid. And reads Frankenstein. Right? Completely honest and perfectly correct. So whatever you're doing with your creativity, you're going to find that. Lozello says something about, I get the appeal of, do you get the feeling that the only comments I see are the ones at the bottom? I get the appeal of subversive writing. There are a lot of stories that put way too much in the hidden message and the entertainment is lost. Television show Lost is a perfect example. The answer to Lost was in the first episode. And then they spent 4 years of wasting your time and arguing that that's not what it's about to come to the end. That's what it was about. And because they wanted to hide all this cool innuendoous connectiveness of philosophers and all these things inside, and nobody got it, man. Nobody got it. The most people realize that the majority of the characters in that show are named after historical philosophers. No. It's a TV show. Yeah, you're completely right, Lizelle. You're completely right. You don't have to look at anything that's produced and look for the deeper context to it. You don't have to look at things for what's the subversive message in it, because not everything has it, right? Sometimes a fart joke's just a fart joke. I did a page on that. I did a page where all it is portraits of people laughing. And, you know, the whole point of that page is sometimes you just have to laugh. And then and behind all these portraits is embedded the text that says fart joke. And in the bottom panel, because when you hold that page a foot from your face and you realize you can see fart joke written in the back, the last panel says, come on, you smiled at least, right? You know you did, didn't you? Because it's dumb. Is there a complex thing to it? Everybody's laughing and having fun and enjoying a fart joke. So you can look at that maybe as a complex element, but it's a fart joke. At the end of the day, it's an elaborately drawn page, a fart joke.
Yeah.
And that is fun, you know. So yeah, right.
Yeah. I feel like too, like sometimes with subversive content, like it's playing on things that everybody knows, like the zeitgeist type of stuff. And you know, so like if you do something, you know, that wants to say, you know, Trump is bad, like that's not going to go over a lot of people's heads these days, because it's like that's the narrative of our culture half the time, you know. So like, you know, not to be on any side of anything, I'm just saying, like, there's like sometimes it's almost like everybody gets it, you know, I would think. And then sometimes it's just too far, you know, removed from the common knowledge base, I guess, you know.
Well, it's one of those things where sometimes it's just lazy, right? Like,
true, yeah.
People doing portraits of Trump going, okay, you're another person that's drawing a picture of him. We used to have a guy named Merle Tingley here in London, and he was the political cartoonist for the London Free Press for 38 years. And when he retired, there's no fanfare for him. There's no real appreciation for it. He left his office with a box and went outside, and his daughter picked him up in her car. And it's just sad. Now we have the Ting show every year in honor of him because of his reputation on the outlook of a whole bunch of illustrators in the region. Because what the man would do is so direct and indirect at the same time, is that he would have an illustration of, you know, City Hall is trying to decide on the bus issue again, and he literally drew the majority of the City Hall councilors, woohoo, out the window of a bus. Yee-hoo! Like it's a big old party. They're not going to get anything done. Yeah. But he doesn't say anything like they're not going to get anything done. He just draws them. The City Hall's working on the bus issue again. And yee-hoo! There's such a statement in that he hasn't made, but he has made, right? But at the same time, it's just a fun picture. You know, I love stuff like that. And I love creators that can do that. But like you say, that works to the zeitgeist at the time in the locality that I'm in. But it doesn't make any sense to some people at all. But when you've got something that is so divisive, like American politics, buckle up. Here comes a Canadian's perspective. Y'all need to learn to get along. No, I'm not. You have in politics a division of ideas. As simple as that. Right or wrong, left or right, my side, your side. It's just a disagreement on issues. And, you know, people give people a hard time for sitting on a fence. But it's really uncomfortable to straddle a fence, because I tend to try to look at both sides of it. The fences are uncomfortable. And I get both sides. And in getting both sides, when you see so many people vilifying Trump, and at the same time, you got so many angry people that vilify Biden, and then you got people that vilify Kamala Harris. I want to say her name right. Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
It's Harris, right?
Yeah.
Okay. My point is that even the people that are on the same side with Biden and Harris, and unfortunately I couldn't tell you. I think it was Spence. Was that Trump's guy?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Pence, right?
And Pence. I'm sorry. Again, Canadian. So
No,
with
that's all
Harris
right.
and Biden, these guys are all on the same side, and yet people on the same side don't agree on part of the equation. So no matter what, when you do these cartoons and when people do these zeitgeist broad statements, that it's going to annoy a lot of people as much as everybody's just going to go, yeah. And it's a tricky thing to do that when you're working in your stuff. And if you're doing a comic book and you make comparisons, like I always think it's the stupidest thing in the world to put a president-elect or a prime minister-elect in a comic book. I think it's dumb. And the reason that I think it's dumb is that this month, everybody in that club, America or Canada or whatever, is going to be really excited to get that issue because look, there's our guy. Well, 10 years from now, no one cares.
Yeah.
10 years from now, you go, that story's 10 years old because there's that guy. And that breaks the illusion. It breaks the magic. It breaks the spell of stories being universal and timeless. Now, you set a book in the Victorian time. As soon as it's not the Victorian time anymore, you look at it as a book in the Victorian time. But at least it's a time period as opposed to a small parcel of time. So that's tricky.
Yeah.
That's tricky. Those images and how they're assessed in the popular zeitgeist. I think it's easier to be distanced from that. And unless you're doing specific material that is a specific commentary to time and place, stay away from them. I think that it's easier just not to include that stuff. Like when you want to do, I'm going to do an awesome comic that's going to include Led Zeppelin. Well, what period's your book set in? 2023. Well, how are you going to have Led Zeppelin in it? You should have Greta Van Fleet. No. Is that you? Was that at your house?
Oh yeah, motorcycle drove by.
Because my window's open in my studio. If you're going to do that, somebody says, well, you should have Greta Van Fleet because they're the band that lock, stock, and barrel takes everything from Led Zeppelin. But Steve, man. So, but the person says, no, I want to include Zeppelin because I like Zeppelin. I'm not going to call it Zeppelin, but it's going to be clearly Zeppelin that's on stage. Power to them, right? Power to a person, power to a creator for including what they want to include. It's just the more that you allocate the specificity of the thing, then you're locked in that popular zeitgeist, that public zeitgeist for that specific time and place. So.
Yeah. Well, I feel like what a lot of the like subversive, like you said, it's kind of more about the specificity of it. Because like Frankenstein's monster, obviously, continued to have an audience to this day. And it's not specific. I didn't even know it was about what you said it was about, so it had that level like fully formed. I think that's kind of part of the thing is like having the actual story fully formed and being able to make it in a way that it's independent of whatever specific thing you're talking about. And I think that's how you can avoid, some of those problems you were talking about,
Yeah. But those things, so let's talk about very specifically short story to long story.
Yeah.
Right? That's with all my perambulations, I know it's what you're asking to come in for. A short story, you were looking at a simple idea. And you're looking at examining that in whatever way you choose to do in a very simple way. If it's a conversation, if it's a, Bob and the milk situation. If it's an editorial viewpoint would be somebody explaining, Bob woke up this morning and realized there's no milk in the fridge. Bob put on his shoes, they head to the store. It was at the store. And so you can do these numerous panels and having somebody really filling in what has happened in between. Or you can have a style where you have Bob open the fridge, go, no milk again. Isn't that the way it always is? And go off in his head. And then as he's walking to the store, he's still arguing about the secondary subject, which is how Bob is relating the lack of milk to greater problems in life. And whatever it is, a short story is taking on an idea. A long form story, there's two things happening. A whole bunch of little ideas along the way, a whole bunch of little moments, a whole bunch of little scenes, right? Stretched out scenes, like if you do an editorial piece and it short steps everything, a long story fills in all the gaps. So you have all these little ideas being addressed and expressed and built on top of each other, little pancakes that make for a more interesting story. But there's the greater idea at play. And that greater idea at play, right, has influence over all the other little ideas. So a short story is examining a part, right? And you can do a small part or a big part in a condensed way, but it's a part. And a long form story that is going to take you X amount of pages or X amount of time in an animation or a film or something like that. That long story has one overarching idea that includes all the other little sub ideas. That's the difference between the two. And if you start with this, it's not going to make as much sense, right? Because you've got to spend X amount of time preparing all of that to get to the big story. And but if you start doing some of these. Now, a thing that people can do, here's a really sneaky thing. If you want to do a big project and you're not going to be talked out of it because you are set in your ways. I don't mean you, Marsh. I mean somebody out there in the interwebs. No, I'm going to do the epic. I'm going to do the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings all in one. Right? Do scenes. Okay? Just do scenes. And then over the course of all the little scenes that you're doing, right, try to figure out how to tie them together. Occasionally have somebody mention, oh yeah, and Trump's our president. I don't know what it is, right? But have that relatable idea involved in all of your little stories. And then you can take all of your little stories and compartmentalize all that stuff and then condense it into one big story you got now from all your little bits. It's like making a cake by layers, right? It's like building a 7-layer cake. It's a lot of cake. So, I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach, and I think that's actually how some of our most well-known stories actually were created sometimes. Even in the example of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, that turned into something way bigger, but it started as something small. Other examples I can think of are like, Batman and Superman and things like that, like these little anthology stories that had this element, had that element. Oh, we kind of threw away that element because it's not, you develop the character actually through this iterative situation. But it ends up becoming like this bigger story. It's interesting though, because some people that's like one approach but I feel like there is the approach. I mean, if you're new, probably this isn't your approach, but of really kind of orchestrating a huge story, and actually working the opposite direction that you suggested. It's like I said, I think that comes with you've already got the experience under your belt to be able to approach it that way. But
they've done a ton of work in order to do that. They've done a ton of work with all of those little ideas and stacking up. Pancakes is probably better than cake. They've stacked up all those pancakes to make the heaviest plate you've ever seen. And they've taken the time to do that, because nobody just goes, I'm going to write Lord of the Rings and starts with, in the beginning. Nobody does that, right? They're going to start with all the different facets of it. And so it's the same amount of work. I'm just saying, if you're going to approach creativity, I advocate that you start and then expand.
Yeah.
And the reason that I advocate you just start and then expand from there is that the sheer daunting, overwhelming factor of starting with the example that we're using, Lord of the Rings. Start with Beowulf. You know what I mean? Start easy. And for, Beowulf, do you know Beowulf?
I'm not super familiar. I know it's an epic poem,
It's
from
the most epic in the English poem. It's the first epic English poem. And yet at the same time, it's incredibly old English. So it's hard to understand. But it's a basic story based on myths and fireside tales that was recorded. And so these epic, it's like, the Monty Python sketch? Kids these days, you try to tell them how we had it when we were the age, and they don't believe you. Do you know that sketch?
I'm not super familiar with.
When I was a kid, there were 26 of us living in the same house. And we had nothing. Oh, you think you had it rough? And the other guy beside him says, there were 78 of us in our house. Well, when I say a house, I actually meant a hole in the ground. And that story just builds and builds and more complexity. Well, that's what early tales were, like Beowulf. It's, so-and-so talking about the ogre attacks the village. Well, you think that ogre was tough? His mom was worse. And there's the second part of Beowulf, and it just goes on and on. But that's early stories. They start from really simple basis, and they're collected, and they're compiled together. These small pieces of story. The monster that attacks this little village, and the warriors cannot fight it off, so they call to the great chieftain, the great warrior who oversees all these small tribes, and he comes on his big boat. He's going to take care of business, and sure enough, he does. That would be one story. That's two stories now. First is the monster attacks the village, and then nothing we can do. Second story is here comes a big champion, and he does the business. And then the third part is mom comes looking for her son, and she's a lot nastier than the son is. So it's, but somebody sat down and wrote those out. All, the old fairy tales and all those old things. The reason that Tolkien did what he did is because that's what he taught.
Yeah.
And
he was a linguist.
He understood the fabric of all of that, right? And latticed it all together. But he also knew an awful lot about an awful lot of old languages, and started to fabricate his own. So there's an elegance and simplicity, but there can be an elegant simplicity in a larger thing.
Yeah.
It's just practice.
Yeah. And I think, kind of getting to one of the things I was asking you earlier about, like, what do you learn from doing these like little stories that maybe could contribute to larger stories? I think that's some of the stuff, that's helpful. Because the thing is even a big story, no matter how big it is, it kind of does have to be about one small thing in the overarching thing, even though you may explore a whole bunch of other stuff. But like, to me, even a movie is really a short story. When you're really talking about a long form story, to me, that's when you get into like this episodic, like, like Game of Thrones or something, or whatever there's so many of them. I mean, there's a million of these, episodic TV shows. I feel like that's really where long form storytelling comes in. And to me, it amazes me some of the writing in these TV shows and how they thread together all these things. And you can really get to know characters more in these kind of narratives.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're continuously, very slowly developing a theme, and you really get to know what the theme is. Like even in something as silly as, like, say, Monk or something, or like any of these like detective shows, there's something kind of building,
Yeah.
and it's intriguing. But again, even that is made up of a zillion different little stories.
Well, look at, I think one of the most subversive ones of those, as an example, is Seinfeld.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't think so, right?
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of the years, there's very little growth in all of those characters. The four of them are on the outside looking in judgment, never satisfied, doing what they do. Jerry is the only real one who's in a state of comfort, right? And despite that, he cannot find comfort in a relationship outside of the codependency he has with his three co-stars. So, but over the course of the years and the little things that happen, right? The lady he dates, but he's not sure if she's all natural, and so he blows that. Or the guy who makes soup and they all go to his place and so they offend him. Or, the person that they have deported because they think he might be a terrorist. All these little stories that there's very little connecting threads from that to the next one, and they offset, especially Jerry's dating for the different women that he dates each season. There's always oh, I got a date tonight, and so he says, hey, you went out with that girl? No, that didn't work out. And we never know who those in between girls are, just to diffuse the fact that 4 episodes were focused on that girl. So they trick us the whole time, but then at the end of Seinfeld, they get arrested and they're brought before court, and the court parades for us all these witnesses that are lined up against them, and it's all of these little pieces from all of the years of Seinfeld. And it's at the end, it makes you realize that all of it's connected. These people have been turds for years. And all of the stuff that you've been enjoying about watching these guys going, I can't believe I did that, and enjoying it, laughing along with it. And at the end of it, the show says, these are bad people. What are you doing? it's this fantastic, what are you doing? It's a beautiful Larry David joke. You're liking the wrong guy, So it's I love stuff like that. But, you don't realize it. The good stuff, you don't know what's happening, So
I kind of first of all, I didn't know that. I guess I've never finished the full Seinfeld show.
I'm sorry for blowing it for you.
No, that's all right. It still seems interesting. I'm gonna have to go do that because I did start watching it again a while back, so I want to keep going with that. But I'm a little bit hesitant to ask this, but I'm also like, I'm kind of curious, and feel free to not reveal your secrets. But I'm curious because I mean the whole idea of like the subversity, and I probably should retitle this show like Subversity or something because we talked more about that than anything. But
I think it's a good thing, long versus short.
Yeah. But the whole idea of subversity is kind of okay. You have something you're being subversive against. So I'm curious, like in your writing, what is the thing? What kind of subversive stories do you tend to tell?
I'm opaque. I think I'm very on the plate.
Okay.
I really do. If you look through the stuff that I do, so one of the assessments that I had to go through with the publisher was an editorial assessment of what I do, and it told me things that I didn't realize I was doing, which is good, right?
Yeah,
but it's an outside perspective that helps you out as a creative to say, what the hell, have I really been doing that? So some of my pieces are funny. Some of my pieces are absurd. Some of my pieces are satirical. Some of my pieces are reflective. But all of them, I believe the expression they used was an irrepressibly off the wall positive outlook, even in dark things, even towards dark, ideas. And I talk a lot about how dumb we can be.
About how what?
How dumb we can be.
Oh, okay.
How dumb we are.
Okay.
How silly it is. How like whenever one of my pages I even titled "Not Another Story About Fighting." Because it's people fighting. So visual, I told you it's not a story about fighting. All visual elements are people fighting. What I'm talking about is we have different ideas and they don't always connect. That's okay. It's okay for them not to connect. It's important that we recognize that and just get on with it. And I that's paraphrasing, but I wrote that in a page where I tell you this isn't about fighting and show you that it is. Well, secretly tell you people fight, but it's okay. So it's this wishy-washy back and forth, so you don't know what I'm actually doing. But things like that are important to allow ourselves to let out in our story. So while I might do a page called Fart Joke, at the same time I'm doing reflections on Batman's a power fantasy. It's simply a power fantasy, and people need to realize that. And if all you read is Batman after 40 years, right?
What's that say about you?
There's a lot of material out there, guys. So I'll make these reflective examinations of things, but at the same time, in equal parts and equal measures, I've got a badger in a taxi cab picking up Bilbo Baggins to drive him to Mordor. Because wouldn't that have made the movie easier? So, everything doesn't have to be a certain way. And so what the underlying secret sauce to what I'm doing is I am exploring story. I'm taking a fabricated rule of comics having to be, here it comes, ready? This way, right? Profile format. Well, the stories that I tell are in landscape format. So I've already broken this rule. And then I play with the panels that I use. I play with the approach that I take. I play with the materials that I use. I switch all of them all the time. You can't do a story that has the writing moving up in the Western market. Yes, you can. And let me show you how, right? Like I'm going to take a few stabs at it. Maybe one of them will work. Here's a story that I've done that you can literally cut out all the panels and rearrange them, and it should work, right? So all of those different, Jim Lujan, I think it was, that suggested me to do a story only using letters and numbers as the characters of the story. Let's go, right? So the secret, my secret thing about, I guess is what you called it. What is it that I'm really doing?
Yeah, the subversive. Yeah.
I'm trying to encourage us all to make new rules. Okay. I'm trying to encourage us all to stop calling cartoons and comic books and to start calling it sequential art and sequential literature. Will Eisner called comic books sequential literature. Will Eisner, who created The Spirit, who created the first How to Make Comics books, who created the first graphic novel, called them sequential literature. Yeah. Sequential art. And yet, the kayfabe guys call them, everybody's a cartoonist. No, we're not cartoonists. Cartoonists do periodicals and newspapers. Single image pieces, that's a cartoon. Sequential stories, you could subjectively call it a cartoon, but it's more than that, right? We're taking those images and those stories and we're stretching them and elaborating on them. So I'm trying to push with all the things that I'm doing, the reason I take on ideas that I would never do, right? The reason that I take on whatever I'm thrown at, like 3-word prompts or a horse playing guitar, riding a bicycle on the edge of a black hole. Thank you, Jim. Let's go. And I try to explore and examine them from different ways and different perspectives and different styles. And then, in addition to that, work with different tools and different visual approaches and different styles. So I'm not deconstructing. I'm trying to push.
Yeah.
And it's not something that it's not in any way, shape, or form like he's doing the thing, the newness. He's the guy. No, it's not. We're all doing it. But that is a real part for me is what am I going to do today and how am I going to approach this today? You know, I have it in my head to draw a story where everything's upside down. That's a goal I've set for myself, is to draw a story where everything is upside down and to make logic out of that, right? But the one story that I always say that I won't do, and take this as you will, Marsh, I'm going to show you, okay? So this is the one story, a sketchbook. I'll show it to you in camera here. Haunted bow tie, okay? Right there, haunted bow tie. Anyone who wears it kills. I mean, the only reason that I say that, I mean, that's like, sure, I'll do that tomorrow. You know what I mean? I don't have any problem to do that story. But it's just, it's you know, you can drop a bow tie being passed from person to person and murder, murder, murder. That's it. That's easy to do. But I always say that that's this one story I cannot do. Just because, you know, I'm kind of absurd. I'm kind of a absurdist, and I set myself up with a really simple and dumb story that's impossible for me. Bob goes to the store for milk. Never done that story. As many times as I've used that to illuminate short story, I've never drawn that.
Well.
So I don't know if that answers the question for you.
Yeah, no, it does. It's interesting because I feel like I can definitely like really relate with that, because that's a lot of what I've done with my creativity in my life. Not in the same way you do, but I was always like, this is like just one of the many examples I could bring up, but like, you know, I go back sometimes and I listen to like old music I made, and I was making these beats like for people to rap on, but they were unrappable beats, kind of like they weren't like, they were kind of too fast, or there was too much sound in them, so there wasn't room for the rapper to be like, because all I was really doing was experimenting, and I guess what I really wanted to do was just find new ways to make music in that genre.
That's
And
great.
and now I embrace that, but back then I look back and I'm like, those did not do what I was trying to make them do at the time, you know. But it's the same thing. Like was always like trying to push the boundaries of what is possible, and I don't know if I'm as much on that as I used to be. It was something I definitely was into as a kid, especially, but I can definitely respect that, and I've learned to love and embrace experimentation, and so that's interesting though, that's kind of a big push of what makes you tick when you're making these comics and stuff.
It's everybody does it. I think everybody actively does it, and I love to hear that about the music. I love to hear that. That's fantastic that you did that, Marsh, because you force yourself to grow so that you look back on it and go, oh, okay, that's what was happening. And you came to that's what was happening because of the examination you made then with the experimentation, right? I think that if you pick up a pencil for the first time tonight and you draw a story, you draw from a simple cartoon to a pictorial history of the Napoleonic Wars, which has actually been done with dots. So it's one of the greatest comics I've ever seen. Somebody did a story of the Napoleonic Wars only using dots. There's a dot, and above it says, "I, Napoleon, will change the world." And the next panel has 2 dots, and it says, "Sir, I have news." What is it? That's these little bits of dialogue in these little rectangles and the dots. And so because the person didn't think they could draw, so they just broke everything down. And then the funny joke of it is that on the cover it has a magnifying glass. And if you were to use a magnifying glass and look at the dots, you would see that they're actually little French soldiers. But no, they're not. They're dots. But story can be genius, and experimentation can be genius, and anything can be new. And anything can break the rules and conformity and become some new expression for everybody to engage in. The secret is, that's it.
Yeah.
Just sit down and do your thing. And there's no way that I could do what Marsh does. There's no way that I does, because it wouldn't be Marsh.
Yep.
And it wouldn't be me. And it wouldn't be whoever might be tuning in to your stream, Marsh. It wouldn't be them. It wouldn't be anybody else's. Whatever somebody does, it's theirs. If somebody else can't do what they can do, it wouldn't be them. So the secret sauce to the great creator that is watching Marsh's stream is picking up a pencil or a stick in the mud and take a picture of it. It doesn't matter what it is. Take photographs with your cellular phone and take those photographs and mat them into a pictorial image on paper, and you've made a movie, right? There's no rules, right? So it's, yeah. Courtney, what do you think? I think that's a great idea.
Totally. Cool. All right. Well, I mean, we've been going here for 2 hours. I think we've covered some interesting ground. I just want to say thanks to everybody in the chat too. P. Higgs, I see you there. I didn't too much get to what you were saying there, but we see you. And everybody else, Jim Lujan, thanks for coming by. Everybody, and also, I should mention there was a super sticker here too from Sideburns. So thank you very much.
That's awesome, buddy.
Thank you so much, Sideburns, for that. So yeah, thank you, Christopher, for coming on. Once again, everybody, if you want to learn more about what Christopher's doing, he's got 3 links in the description that you can check out: his website, his IG, and his YouTube. And there's lots of great content there. And you do a video every weekday at 2:00. Am I right?
Monday through Friday at 2.
Awesome.
And it's just fun, right? Like it's somebody suggested an idea, and I am going to make a 1-page story out of that. And each day I do a new one, and I post the day before's page on Instagram and Facebook. And so if people are suggesting things, if people want to jump in and follow and engage, hey, come with a loaded gun. And I know that sounds crazy, but what I mean by that is, if whatever your ideas are, let's go, right? I'm not going to draw it how you want. I'm just not, because I'm not you. But if you've got an idea that you want to see, hey, here's an idea. What would it be if somebody did that? Well, I'll try. And so suggestions like a horse playing guitar, riding a bicycle on the edge of a black hole, I'll give it a go, right? And so yeah, please feel free to come and join in and have some fun. I'm looking forward to a suggestion from Marsh soon. And by the way, for anybody that's here, Marsh is going to join me on Thursday.
Yes.
We're going to make some comics, buddy.
Yes, sir.
we're going to do some jamming. It's going to be
That's
cool.
gonna be fun.
So,
Yeah, I look forward to that.
yeah, you're a very talented guy, and it's nice to see the support. That super sticker is genius. Be pleased with yourself. P. Higgs likes the Frankenstein. There's more of it in this one. If you know, the Frankenstein things are silly. I'm going to be doing one. Maybe I'll do that Thursday of Frankenstein. I can't remember what it is. Somebody just suggested a new one. Frankenstein as a hairdresser.
It's not going to be long before you have a whole Frankenstein book on your hands.
I'll never be able to print it legally.
Really?
Yeah, it's a Universal Monster.
Oh, is it too close to that, you think? I guess it is. That's too bad.
Yeah, I had a Frankenstein page included in my new book, but because I'm working with a publisher that opens me up to Ingram's, which is the largest global distributor.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of extra rules that I can't have anybody else's characters in. So,
Yeah.
So my Universal Monsters as the Brady Bunch, which is one of the pages that I've done. So, you'll see it. You scan through the Instagram. I couldn't include that in the book. So what I've done is for the convention that's happening this weekend, and for anybody that buys the book when it comes out, I'm going to have insert pages of the ones that I wasn't allowed to do, so you can stick that in the book.
There you go.
Version.
I mean, you can always do a bootleg version that's not published by a publisher, maybe, but even maybe that would be a problem.
I've done tons of those, right? Like with the comic company, I published 30 books, but of my own. But the going with this route is so that I can go on Amazon and all those things and yada yada yada. Take that next step that I need to a larger crowd. Before I stop blathering at you, Marsh. Sorry if I got to get the gab, and meaning that I just can't stop. P. Higgs said something really cool about indie comics is and the liberty that it presents people to do whatever they want. Earlier on.
I'm looking for it.
I'm paraphrasing it.
Yeah.
But I completely agree. If you want to sing you want to sing your own song, and you want to do whatever you like, do it. You're not going to get published by Marvel, but you'll find a way.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I
would agree with
that. More show on the show. Fun,
Yes.
Thank you very much for putting me on. There's a lot of cool cats and kittens in this group here. That's you've got some cool people that tune into your stream. So really nice to meet a lot of people here, and thanks for having me for the interview. It's very nice here, man.
Anytime, man. I'm happy to have you on anytime if you want to do a video. So it's always a good conversation, and I'm looking forward to being on your show. Again, as he said, stay tuned to Christopher's channel. Go over there and subscribe, and you can see me on Thursday there, and just watch his shows. Like, I love watching them and you get to see before your eyes how a one-page comic forms. You finish it later, but you get like a lot of the initial part of it going in that stream, and that's actually pretty vital stuff to get to know when you're starting to learn how to do comics. So a lot of good information there. So yeah, anyways, we've been going long enough. Thank you everybody once again. Thank you, Christopher, and I think that's it.
Cool. Thanks so much.
All righty. Have a good one, everybody.